Hey everybody, Rick here. The live stream may have started. I can't see it yet. I'll get started in just a minute once I get a link, and I got the link. Happy Monday. I hope everyone's doing all right. I know it's a bit of a bear market out there. No need to get uptight. Usually works itself out. Just posting the links. All right. Yeah. So there's a reason why it's called a bear market. It's because people are like, "Arr," like a bear. That's why it's not called a bunny rabbit market or a butterfly market. It's called a bear market. And some people might have bought it at $1.50. Now it's down to 35 cents for ADA anyway. So people are going to be a little upset. Anyway, what I'm doing a live stream for here is to give a description of there's three different topics, and one of them Charles touched on last Friday about Cardano stake pool operators being able to provide consent to a transaction if a delegation occurs. Now, this was a hypothetical scenario that, if needed, that could be implemented. There was also discussion around KYC at the layer 1 level, and it appears that these different concepts have been conflated, and it kind of confused people. And it has some people upset. And so I'm just going to try to provide some calming words because you got to apply common sense sometimes. And once you apply common sense, you go, oh, yeah, well, that's not so bad. It doesn't mean go ahead and accept KYC. I'm just going to try to spell out the differences. Julio's here. The Victor's here. Hey, good to see you. Good morning. Good morning. So anyway, Charles had mentioned in a few videos last week in one context about contingent staking where stake pool operator approves a transaction, and in another context where if KYC is required, somehow that could be provided as well. And so what I want to get at here is these are separate issues, okay? Or not separate issues. These are separate actions and they're separate concepts. KYC is one thing, okay? Consent to a transaction is a different thing. And a digital ID is yet a different thing again. A DID is not KYC. A KYC is not consent to transaction. Consent to transaction doesn't mean the DID is any good for that. These are all different things, and they can be used if and when needed, when and where needed. Now, Cardano stake pool operators do not have to do KYC. Cardano stake pool operators, whether in the United States or no matter where you're at in the world, or maybe even using Starlink, Cardano stake pool operators don't hold people's ADA, right? They don't have custody of it. And Cardano stake pool operators do not send ADA to delegators. Delegators are like proof of work mining GPUs. They're providing hash power. The protocol determines if the rewards magically appear in their wallet. They do not get sent from any particular stake pool. The protocol generates those rewards at their staked address based on the blocks produced by the pool. Nothing is sent, nothing is held in custody. There is no need for KYC. It's just not there, right? It's just not there. So what I like to do for common sense purposes is about 90% of everything crypto does, it's already being done in the rest of the world. Some people call it the real world, but I think crypto is the real world. So how does the rest of the world do it? Well, who do you KYC with? You KYC with your bank, right? So you KYC with your bank for certain reasons, depending on what country you live in, depending on the amount of money you're putting in that bank, depending on what the regulations are in your jurisdiction. You do a KYC with the bank, and then you can put your money in the bank, which is an endpoint, okay? It's a specific entity. It's an endpoint. You don't have to KYC with your internet service provider. You're using a web browser, you log into your bank. You don't have to KYC with your internet service provider in order to put money in your bank, okay? Therefore, there's no reason why, because the internet service provider is an infrastructure provider. They provide traffic passing. It doesn't matter what's in the traffic. They can't even see what's in the traffic. They might know where it's going, unless you're using a VPN. If you're using a virtual private network, they might, oh, it's going to a VPN, but they don't know where the endpoint is. The endpoint is the bank. And you're good to go. Why? Because you KYC'd with the bank, right? Does that kind of make sense now? And it doesn't even matter if it's your internet service provider. And I'll give you 2 examples. Let's say your internet service provider is Comcast. The bank's ISP is AT&T, and the ISP in between the two is Verizon, right? You don't have to KYC with Comcast and Verizon and AT&T to log into your bank. You don't have to. You're sending your transaction through those 3 different ISPs. It's hopping through them, but ultimately it's the bank KYC. You're good to go, log in the bank. And you can even take ISPs out of the loop. You can log in through public Wi-Fi. You can log into the library, or you can log in through a VPN. Your bank doesn't deny you access to the bank just because you logged into the bank with a VPN. It just doesn't work like that. You took care of it with the endpoint, the bank. The Cardano stake pool network operators operating the block producers and relays, they are network infrastructure providers. They don't need to KYC anybody for anything. I think people conflated a lot of the different points Charles had made last Thursday and Friday, and they got things confused. Let's see, what else? Any questions in the chat? Let me know. Let me know if you got questions. I hope this all makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, tell me it doesn't make sense, and I'll try to explain it even better. I mean, there's Starlink now. You don't have to KYC with Starlink just because you're logging into a bank. There's a lot of things, a lot of internet services you can use without KYC. You can go on public Wi-Fi and go to pretty much anything you want on the internet. The only time you need to provide your identification is if you have to log into the endpoint. And the other endpoint is where you are standing or where you are sitting with your laptop and how you connected. That's another endpoint. But everything in between, the whole network infrastructure, it doesn't need these KYC things for you as an individual trying to use a bank. So it doesn't make sense for stake pool operators. And I'll give you some more examples. JPEG Store. I don't need to KYC with JPEG Store. I don't buy things from JPEG Store. Last week, I went on JPEG Store and, I bought an ape. I bought an ape JPEG for a lot. Okay, 11,000 ADA. That's a lot of ADA. And in any country in the in the Western world, almost any country in the United States, okay, any country in the Western world, they would say, hey, that's a lot of money. You need to KYC. No, I don't, because it's a private sale. So some other private individual privately sold me the ape JPEG for the ADA. I don't need a KYC. That's a private sale, right? When I go over to the hardware store, if I buy a $2,000 grill, I don't have to KYC with the hardware store to buy a $2,000 grill. I can go over there with a suitcase full of $1 bills and hand it to them. They're going to hand me a grill. I don't have to KYC with them. Those are private sales. You don't have to KYC that kind of stuff, but it depends on your jurisdiction, right? It also depends on the type of transaction and who the private entity is on the other end, and blah, 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 and all that stuff, right? So I don't have to KYC on JPEG Store because I'm not buying from JPEG Store. They're just facilitating a smart contract, so it's easier for me to access. We could do it from a command line if we wanted to. I could drop a link on Twitter. I could drop a link in Discord and say, hey, anyone want to buy this ape JPEG? Boom, and there you go. Good to go. And then Marlowe's coming out, right? So I could make a smart contract in Marlowe that says, okay, here's a NFT sale smart contract where I put my JPEG in the smart contract. Like I put my ape in it and say, this ape is for sale for 11,000 ADA to whoever puts 11,000 ADA in the other end, and someone else drops 11,000 ADA in the other end, and then whoosh, the transaction completes. There you go. Good to go, right? It's a private sale. So anyway, that's my take on it. The key, what can you do, or what should you? Well, first of all, relax. Okay. These were all hypotheticals. They are possibilities, and they might have useful use cases. Like if someone actually builds an on-chain bank, they might need to KYC at that on-chain bank, not at the stake pool, not at the wallet. Okay. And if taxes are due, taxes don't require KYC. They just require people to report their taxes. That's a totally separate subject as well, right? Like if I bought this ape for 11,000 ADA and it's only worth 11,000 ADA and there's a taxable event in there, it's incumbent upon me to pay my taxes in my jurisdiction. It's not incumbent upon the person on the other end to send in a 1099 or 1098 form to the IRS because I bought their ape. That's just not how it works. Okay. So don't give them an inch. If you have problems with the way regulators put pressure on the crypto industry, write your elected representatives. I know you've heard me say that like 20 times before. They are elected. The legislators in the United States are elected legislators. They do respond to emails. Don't give them another inch. You know how it is. Okay. You got to have a laugh. It's a bear market, right? Let's say for hypothetically, you have 8 inches of something and you give them an inch. Well, they're going to want the other 7 inches eventually. So don't give them an inch, right? Regulators get heavy and they push too hard. You push back. And that's all we can do is you can push back and you can vote with your feet. You can opt out, right? So if regulators got too pushy in one jurisdiction, you can move to another jurisdiction. If I was operating an online cryptocurrency business, let's say I was selling products and I was an endpoint and I had a problem with, I couldn't comply with the KYC. I didn't want to take all of this beautiful Web3 data that's highly secure for the users and then build a massive database of Web2 email addresses and names, because that's a security hazard. That's a honeypot. It's an undue burden. You shouldn't have to stockpile all these names to conduct normal everyday commerce. Okay. You just pay your taxes. You're good to go. Right. So instead of stockpiling all these names because the jurisdiction where I live requires that, okay, move jurisdictions, relocate the business to a different jurisdiction where they don't require you to do stupid things like that. Okay. So that's just my take on it. Common sense always applies. Let me check for questions in the chat. I'll answer them. I wanted to keep this brief for people watching later. I know it's early in the day on Monday. A lot of people at work in the US or just getting off work over in Europe. Yeah, so Lefa says, I'm surprised so many people defend KYC for SPOs on Twitter. Yeah, me also. Here's how people normally react to change. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3, when a new change comes along, no matter what that change is, usually 1/3 of the people are in favor of it. They're like, yay, and kind of like blindly accept it, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. 1/3 of the people, they don't care either way. They're like, whatever. And 1/3 of the people push back and they fight it. Depends on the change. It's not always the same people, right? So yeah, a little bit more pushback for the KYC SPO thing. Yeah, definitely pushback. If I see anything come up about SPOs having the KYC people, yeah, I'm going to fight that. That is a fight. That's a fight. Absolutely. Currently, it was hypothetical. Remember, it's just people floating ideas, trying to imagine possibilities. If regulators make this chess move, what's my next move? And then their move, and then my move. And you always have a chess move. So if regulators ever back you into a corner, you got a chess move that gets you out of that corner, right? Rich Bishop says, Gary said Kraken and like issues involve not your keys, not your coin. That does not apply to Cardano staking. Is that your take? Rich Bishop, I would have to understand where you're coming from that. I would have to like recap everything Gary said, which was a lot, and everything that Jesse Powell said, which was also a lot. I'm leaning in favor of Kraken on this. I'm leaning in favor of them because if you give them an inch, they're going to take it all. You know, if they force Kraken to do certain things, like they force them to stop their staking program because they are a centralized entity, or because for whatever reason, doesn't matter, what's going to stop them from doing it to a DEX that has that ADA that people were putting in the liquidity pools? If you don't stop them at Kraken, if you throw Kraken under the bus and let them bulldoze Kraken, there's nothing stopping them from going after a DEX. So stand and fight. And that's what I always say. Now, that doesn't mean, that means use tact and diplomacy. Use tact and diplomacy, write your elected representatives, write your legislators. Gene Sipes says, I'm curious if the government can even realistically enforce SPOs performing KYC. The answer is no, only if you let them. There's no reason for them to do it. So the real question for me, Gene, would be, what problem does it solve? Does it solve some sort of problem? Well, to me, there is no problem. It was very well executed form of decentralized staking. It's a very well executed form of a distributed network, all very well executed. There's no problem the KYC actually solves, only if there's an endpoint. Let's say there's someone, like I mentioned earlier, someone builds an on-chain bank where you actually send your ADA. Well, they need to register as brokers or something, or whatever requirements they have for taking custody of other people's funds, if in fact a human being does have custody of those funds. And so it depends on what that entity is. But if it's a smart contract based platform where it's powered by smart contracts, these are all peer-to-peer trades. These are private individual trades. So in that case, no. Let's see. Thanks for the questions. Say hi to my friends in Renato in Brazil. He wants to know more about Cardano. I think that's to someone else. That was from Milson. Lefa says, I agree. This is the most obvious salami tactic from the SEC. I don't think it's even coming from the SEC. Maybe the Kraken thing. Well, the Kraken thing came from the SEC. But the 3 points I wanted to hit on, KYC, consent to transactions, DIDs, those are all 3 different things. The KYC isn't really an SEC matter. Consent to transactions isn't a matter for any regulators at all. I mean, it's not something that they're asking for, at least not that I know of. And of course, DIDs do not equal KYC. A DID is not always KYC. A DID can be KYC. Like you can put KYC with a company and they create a DID, and then that DID represents the KYC. But the key is you would want to prevent all of these third-party entities from storing massive stockpiles of your personal data. That's the important part. You don't need all these honeypots. Look what happened with Equifax. Holy cow, they got wrecked. That was a highly trusted entity serving the public almost like on behalf of the government. It's one of the top 3, the 3 credit bureaus in the United States. And Equifax got hacked. It's a big honeypot. It's a huge target. So people went and mined all that private data out of there, and it's been a mess for many years now. So you don't need all of these small entities on a distributed network stockpiling tons of people's private data. Like I'm in the United States, even if it has tax implications. I think I mentioned this before, you know, if Bob from Brazil sends a transaction to Mika in Japan and my stake pool is the one that signs that transaction, who cares? There's nothing in that process that says I need to collect Bob from Brazil's data and I need to collect Mika from Japan data and I need to report that from the IRS. You see, at the core of the problem is these legacy institutions, they're just slow. They're slow to come around. They're slow to understand new technologies. It doesn't mean they're stupid people. They're just gigantic entities where everything moves kind of slow. So the way you do that is they go to stick their hand in a cookie jar, slap their hand, get your hand out of the cookie jar. You have no business doing that. Make the regulators have to prove why they need to regulate something. You know, the old saying, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So you got to make the regulators have to prove why they would need that data, make them prove why KYC would be required for anything whatsoever. What problem does it solve, right? Is there another way to do it without having people give up their privacy and their freedoms? But usually there is. That's kind of how the whole cryptocurrency thing came about. It's another way to do something without people having to give up all their data to, you know, Visa and MasterCard and all of the financial institutions out there. So yeah, common sense always applies. You can always use it. Sometimes people get caught up in the moment. People are a little bit flustered because of the bear market. I have the green light on back here because that's probably the only green you're going to see today. Yeah, because bear markets are rough. They always are. And they tend to drag on for a while. You know, you get a sideways once things go bear and then it sits there and goes sideways. You know, I don't do financial advice. I'm just pointing out that's been the history. That's been the trend in history. Think it's going to happen again? Probably going to happen again. Probably going to happen again. So it could be a long, bearish, crabby market. But keep your chin up. Keep your wits about you. Pay attention to what regulators are doing. Pay attention to what elected reps are doing. Write them. If they start sticking their fingers in the cookie jar, they start burying that elbow in the cookie jar, get them to pull it out. It's going to take all hands effort. It's going to take everybody's effort to do it. There's no one person that can do it on their own. All right, everyone. That's all I got for you today. I think I got all the questions there. Y'all take care. Have a happy Monday and hang tight. Hang in there. You'll be good. You'll be all right. We're good. Oh, and those aren't UFOs like alien UFOs. They're balloons. They're balloons. Those are not UFOs. I've seen a UFO before. That's not a UFO. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.